Thank you for joining us on The Skeptic Sidekick, where we delve into ancient societies, the ghosts, the paranormal, UFOs, all looking at it from the perspective of the true believer and from the skeptic perspective. Joining me, my partner, my co-host, my sibling, Kimber Rodriguez. Myself, I am Richard Gregg. And again, let's look into being the skeptic sidekick. Hey, how you doing today? And welcome again to the Skeptic Sidekick. I am, of course, your host, Richard Gregg, and with me, as always, such a wonderful, great, intelligent, smart, friendly, kind. I mean, she puts the Boy Scouts to shame. My wonderful sister, Kimber Rodriguez.
Hi, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing fine. How are you this week?
I am doing good. I've had a really great week. Kind of went by really fast. Think first it was Monday, then I blinked it was Friday. So go figure.
Right.
But this week is going to be a really, really special week. We do have our first guest, and I'm just so pleased that she's willing to put up with us in our craziness. We have Miss Jennifer Moore, and she's a mentor and healer for sensitive, intuitive women. Jen holds a master's degree in psychology and religion, and she's also an accredited master trainer for EFT International, also the founder of an Empathic Mastery Academy. Jen is the author of Empathic Mastery and hosts the Empathic Mastery Radio. She is also the creator of 2 Oracle decks and the Photographic Healing Tarot. She brings over 30 years of professional and personal experience and merges practicality, intuition, and wisdom to offer insight, guidance, and emotional freedom to those she serves. Again, Jen, thank you so much for joining us this week.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It is just such a pleasure. And I totally want to just second what you're saying about this week whipping by. I'm like, it was Monday and I blinked and now it's Friday. It's been a crazy week. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, what exactly is the EFT International? That's one thing I was wondering about.
Yes. So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, and it's also known as tapping. And basically, it is a way of using light pressure on meridian points on your body and focusing on an issue. And basically, sort of, it's like in a form of emotional acupressure. And it allows us to basically clear stuff and deal with stuff without any needles. And the beautiful thing about it is that it is something that you can do for yourself. And so people can use tapping for like difficult memories. People can use tapping for food cravings. People can use tapping for empathic overwhelm, which is something that I do a lot of work with people on, and you can use it for physical pain. The original person who created EFT, Gary Craig, would say, try it on anything. And I will honestly say there's been nothing that I have found so far that it doesn't make a difference about. So I discovered it a number of years ago, fell so madly in love with it, and just was so blown away by the results for me. I had been struggling with PTSD from a car accident when I was 18 years old. And it wasn't until I used EFT to work on my fears. My husband and I were driving through a really bad ice storm that the terror lifted for the first time since I had been 18 years old. And I had done therapy, I'd done energy work, I'd done work with shamans, I'd done all kinds of stuff, and it was tapping that made me go from basically like a 10 down to a 0.
Wow, that is amazing. I have actually heard of tapping. I've always been curious about it and wondered how it works because I've done a lot of therapies myself, and it just seems like there's certain barriers that I just can't break through.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the thing about what's so amazing about EFT is that it not only addresses the mental part of it, which talk therapy is all in the head, But because EFT uses tapping and awareness of the meridians in our energy system, it's a somatic experience as well. So it allows us to address all of the ways that our stuff gets trapped in our body and isn't just a thought process. And so things that you've talked with your therapist about for the last like 5 or 10 years and it's still sticky, the thing about tapping is that it releases the charge that we carry in our body. And that's the thing that makes it like so amazing. And I just love it.
That is awesome. Um, you refer to yourself as a former hot mess and world-class awfulizer. Say more about that. Like, what does that mean for you, and what does that look like for you?
Absolutely. Okay, so first off, I'm just going to explain my word awfulizer because that's something that I came up with. And it is what it sounds like. Awfulizing is the ability to take any situation and turn it into a complete disaster. So, like for example, somebody doesn't come home for their curfew. And instead of just being like, oh, they're just delayed, it's like your brain takes it and you can see the child in a ditch. And so it's that ability to just like run the worst case scenario and turn it into just the most horrible thing. And as I say, I will say I come from a long line of world class awfulizers. I come from people who can imagine a situation and turn it into total hell. And so I grew up in a family that spent a great deal of time imagining how bad things could be, even when things were going well. There was that sort of pallor of anxiety and that sort of fear of the other shoe dropping that comes with being a world class awfulizer. And for me, I call myself a hot mess because I didn't know what end was up. I was struggling with like an active sugar addiction where I was like self soothing by eating a lot of sugar and candy. But the problem with it is that it worked for about an hour and then I would be like spinning out, totally feeling guilty, feeling depressed, feeling moody, feeling bloated, and really not knowing how to get out of that. And so that was really affecting my mood. But as a highly sensitive empathic person, I was also picking up all the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, the worries, the guilt, the fear, you name it. I was absorbing it from all the people in the world around me. And I also had a pretty serious stuff around just like wanting to be loved and a tendency to do a lot of people pleasing. So I wasn't really looking out for my best interests. I didn't know what was mine, what was coming from somebody else. I wasn't taking really great care of myself. I was putting myself in harm's way. And I was saying yes to a lot of things that I should not have been saying yes to. And so as a result, I was very anxious, high strung, needy, uh, fearful. I mean, you kind of name it. I was a hot mess. So hopefully that gives you a good enough answer.
You mentioned something about sugar.
Yes.
How bad is sugar? Because me personally,
I hate to break it to you if you like sugar, but it is excessively addictive and it's just so lethal, sadly.
I'm a diabetic and I still got that addiction to sugar.
Ah, my heart goes out to you. God bless you. And I actually have on my YouTube channel a tap along video for sugar addiction. And amazingly, you can tap for sugar cravings and it can really, really help make a difference. Now, the thing about sugar is that in my experience, some of us are more sensitive than others are to it. And when we have blood sugar issues, when we have a body that gets thrown out of whack by sugar, not only is it affecting our blood sugar, but insulin is a hormone. Sugar really affects us hormonally, and hormones affect our mood. So the challenge with sugar is that not only does it wreak havoc on our nervous system and our biology and our blood sugar and our metabolism and our hormones, it also, in my experience and my experience working with a lot of people, it really impacts our mood as well. And it can really take us from being sort of feeling fairly calm and even to feeling really anxious, as well as getting what people call the sugar blues, where we feel just really anxious and depressed. Now, I have a personal theory about why we tend to crave it so badly, and that it's that part of it is that it's not your fault, because we live in a society where basically back in the 1970s there was a perfect storm where the food pyramid was changed, and instead of recommending kind of a well balanced, good fats, good proteins, moderate carbohydrates, the food pyramid was actually changed to have carbs at the top, like at the biggest part of the largest amount. At the same time this happened, we had farm subsidies that suddenly made corn syrup like ubiquitous, and where soda used to be something that, like, I don't know how old you guys are, but when I was a really little kid, having soda was a really special treat.
Hmm.
Definitely.
And then suddenly corn syrup became available, and suddenly it became people were drinking soda as a beverage, like they replaced their water with soda. At the same time, we had what are called, the super antibiotics, and a whole bunch of babies not being breastfed because all kinds of women were going back into the workforce. So their gut biomes were never being fed right. And when we were getting sick, we were being given all these super antibiotics. What this did was it was the perfect storm for increase of carbohydrates, increase of antibiotics, which kill the good favorable bacteria in our gut, which then, as a result, caused our bodies to start overgrowing unfavorable bacteria, which includes yeast, or you may have heard of candida, and candida thrives on carbohydrates and sugar. So I personally believe that every single time we start trying to kick sugar and we actually start like putting it down, what I call the yeast beast rears its head. And it's like this organism that lives in our guts. It lives in our entire digestive tract, and it wants to survive. So when we start to say, I don't want to eat as many carbohydrates, I'm going to stop eating sugar, I'm going to put it down, there is this other entity inside of your body that wants to survive, and it is going to give you the hungry horrors anytime you start making that kind of a shift. So I don't know if you can relate to this as somebody dealing with diabetes, but I think that one of the major challenges is that people don't talk about the fact that you're going to go through withdrawal when you put it down, that it's not easy. You can't just will it away, that there is like a certain amount of detoxing and processing the sugar or the lack of sugar that your body's going to have to do when you step away from it. I mean, obviously, this is a topic I'm incredibly passionate about because, for one thing, I don't think our culture gives nearly enough attention to how incredibly important it is to not be consuming sugar, but also we don't give lip service to how hard it is to kick it.
Yes.
It definitely is a hard habit to kick.
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, I was a hyperactive kid that you gave me a candy bar and I'm like bouncing off the walls, running through the house, screaming up at the top of my lungs, that sort of thing. So,
Exactly.
No, I totally get it. My husband recently had a stroke in 2019, but before that, all he would drink would be Dr. Pepper.
Mm, mm.
And he would not drink water. He did not like water. And he would get the 32-ounce cups from the convenience store and go through 5 or 6 of those in a day. After his stroke, I was thinking, okay, now he's got a clean slate. But as soon as he woke up and he was able to vocalize himself, he went right back to craving those Dr. Peppers.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Well, and I also want to say that diet soda is another, like, don't, if you're gonna if you're gonna kick the soda habit, do not replace it with diet soda because it's a neurotoxin.
Hmm.
And I have a friend who's also an EFT practitioner who had a client who lost 40 pounds in 3 months simply by stopping drinking diet soda. I wish it was that easy for the rest of us. I'm like, wow, if that was all it took, I'd be skinny, skinny.
Right.
But the thing is that, it's like these artificial sweeteners are not better for us. They have their own set of things too. And also, juice is not a good alternative because the fruit sugar is actually just as bad as the sucrose. Interestingly, what I learned is that fructose does not cause our body to produce insulin. And so, as a result, we will not burn off the fruit sugar. Fruit can actually really set our blood sugars off in a weird way that, like soda, at least your body's going to produce insulin to try to deal with it. Whereas if you drink like a big glass of orange juice, you're just flooding your body with a whole bunch of sugar. So, water, I like personally some of the stevia based, like, uh, flavoring drops for water if you just want something a little bit more interesting, seltzer water, but just really thinking about how do we drinking, herbal teas and things, how do we shift away from these sodas and these other beverages, as well as, the foods that are just really, really deeply affecting us.
So you're not a big fan of the V8?
As these things go, V8 is probably a much better choice than a lot of other ones because it's made with vegetables as opposed to, fruit juice. So I would say if you were going to try to decide between diet soda, orange juice, and V8, I would say go for the V8 because I don't think that the V8 has nearly the kind of carbohydrates in it or the kind of sugar in it that some of these other high, like sweet fruit juices do.
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on? Because I know that there's these new waters that are out there that are flavored with natural fruits. They're not actually juice. Like I think there's one called ice. There's the vitamin water that they're supposedly using natural sweeteners instead of sugars.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on those?
So my feeling about those is that what you got to do is read the label. It's like the most important thing you can do because the word natural, for example, is basically like a generic term that can be used to mean absolutely anything. Kind of like, the big secret in the coaching world is that anybody can say they're certified and anybody can offer a training or a program that says, I'm certifying you. So there are certain words that don't really have a whole lot of meaning to them, but they sound good. So if you're looking at a beverage and it says natural flavorings, that does not necessarily mean that it's good for you. So, a couple things that I think are really important when it comes to beverages or any kind of food, is turn the box around or turn the bottle around or turn the can around or turn the bag around and look at the nutritional information on it. And what you want to be looking at is three things. You want to look at the carb content on it, you want to see the total carbs, and then you want to look at the sugar content. And you want to see if basically there's a bunch of added, like there's sugar in it, because carbohydrates can show up as sugar, just plain complex carbohydrates, and or carbohydrates show up as fiber. So like if you have a thing on your list where it's like there's like say 15 grams of carbs total, and it says there's like 10 grams of fiber, 3 grams of sugar, the other two is general carbohydrate. The fiber is actually good for you, and so you can subtract it from that 15. But the thing is, like, say you looked at the soda or you looked at the orange juice and you're reading that a 8-ounce cup of this stuff has got like 25 grams of sugar or 50 grams of sugar or 100 grams of sugar, then that's what you're pouring into your body. And, we really like need to, like, my goal personally is to stay under 30 grams of like net carbs on a daily basis because I'm so sensitive to carbs. So it's really important to look at that, the nutritional information. The next thing that's really important to look at is the actual ingredients and what is in there. Like, are there a bunch of things that you don't recognize? Are there things that could set you off? Like sucralose, for example, that is an artificial sweetener, and it's used in a lot of these sort of alternative things. I personally like, there are the sugar alcohols like erythritol or xylitol or allulose, and those I have found my body tolerates very well, and I don't have a problem with it. Or monk fruit or stevia. But there are a lot of other things that are kind of like right on the edge, and you'll find some of these like keto bars and stuff. If you read the ingredients, you're like, that's just full of sucralose and
Mhm.
aspartame. So I would just say the most important thing, or the most important things are read the label and then pay attention to your body. Like, notice how are you feeling? Because a lot of times you'll get pretty quick feedback as to whether something is actually working for your system or if it's making you feel lousy.
Hmm.
Well,
Who would have dreamed that we were going to start the skeptic psychic conversation talking about nutrition?
nutrition is very important to any type of emphatic, psychic, medium, extra large, whatever you call yourself, because it's the natural transition to basically wanting to be as healthy as possible if you are embracing your gift or you're living the gift, I should say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the thing about our diet is, I mean, there's that saying, you are what you eat. And, our food, our diet, what we're putting into our body deeply affects us as intuitives and can really, really deeply affect how our channel, quote unquote, is affected. And so, I think that when we are eating foods that are really causing our system to be out of balance, it can deeply affect our capacity to accurately pick information up. And I think from my experience, sugar in particular had me seeing things through a glass darkly. I was getting information, I was getting intuitive senses about things, but I was getting it through the filter of fear and depression.
Interesting.
Exactly. I kind of had to actually get away from alcohol because I'd have that fear and depression and that the unhealthy side of it. So
Oh, yeah.
sugar, like I said, is tempting, but at the same time,
Not worth it.
yes,
Yeah. Well, and sugar and alcohol are so not worth it. Not worth it. And there's the thinking it through. Alcohol is another form of sugar. And I think that a lot of times, it's sort of like, if we really look back, even if we have issues around alcohol as we become adults, a lot of times you can find the roots of that in our relationship with sugar as children. So, I think they go hand in hand.
definitely.
Yes.
Okay. Do you consider yourself an empath, a psychic, a medium? What do you call yourself when it comes to?
I actually consider myself all of the above. Although I don't necessarily advertise that I'm a medium, I guess the way I would say it is I talk to dead people. But I find that you can't always be sure that somebody's going to show up. And so that pressure to like have somebody show up and be like, I want you to talk to my grandfather or I want you to talk to my dead husband. I'm like, I can't guarantee that.
No,
So, actually, let me take this and talk about like those three terms and talk about my experience and perception of like what's the difference between those three things. So, let's start with empath. So, for me, one thing is that being highly sensitive and empathic, I find it's on a spectrum, and that there are people who are just completely in their own little happy bubble, completely like not aware of what's going on in the world around them necessarily. Like, they can watch the news and know about it, but it's not like they feel things. And then there are people on the other side of it who are so porous and so sensitive to all of the thoughts, feelings, energy, sensations, vibrations, etc., that's going on in the world around them, that they can't even distinguish between themselves and other people. But the thing about being an empath, in my experience, is that it's not an intellectual experience. It is an embodied experience. It's an immersive experience where we feel what is going on in the world around us. And a lot of times, it's not rational. It's not like you have a thought or a flash or an idea. It's just suddenly you're overcome with this unexplainable fear, or you're overcome with this unexplainable sense of sadness. And then you find out that, like you find out that either like a couple days later an event happens that sets something off, or like I often would have had experiences where about a week to 10 days prior to an event, like right before the Pulse nightclub shooting that happened in Miami a number of years ago, I felt horrible for about a week before it happened. And then when it actually happened, I was like, oh, that's what I was picking up on. Or like you feel really, really sad. And then you discover that if the mother of a friend just died. So being empathic, I find, is like this, like very, like it's almost like it's so immersive. It's like you just live it. Whereas being psychic, in my experience, is more of a knowing, of picking up information, but there's a sense of separation between self and other. Like when I get psychic information, I am aware that information is coming to me, but it's not like I'm immersed in it and feeling it. It's more of this knowing. And in my experience, there's sort of three words. There's empathy, which is that ability to imagine and put ourselves into somebody else's shoes. There's empathic, which is often that sensitivity to other people, but to a greater or lesser degree. And then there's empath, which is the kinds of people like me who basically can feel other people, can feel the planet, can feel energy, can feel all kinds of stuff going on around us. Sometimes we're picking it up from the past, sometimes we're picking it up from the future, sometimes we're picking it up from like ghosts. And depending on the degree of sensitivity, we may be plugged into the whole planet. And the other thing is, with being empathic or an empath, a lot of times not only do we pick up information through our dominant sensory processing, like if you're a visual person or an auditory person, but we'll also pick it up through the people or the stuff around us, so that we'll sort of be like, even you may not be a super auditory person, but you're around a really auditory person, so information is coming through that way. Whereas for psychics, there's what are called the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. And with the clairs, it's usually more of, you get this, like a clairvoyant is somebody who's seeing the pictures and getting a sense of something. Clairaudience are people who tend to hear things and get messages coming through. You might have like a bunch of words coming in. Clairsentience is more of this sense of knowing, just this deep felt knowing. And with being a psychic, a lot of times we have a dominant sensory awareness through which the psychic information comes. And then being a medium, for me, is about that ability to, like, where we are communicating with spirit. And I'm what I would call a co-conscious channel, where I don't go away when somebody's talking to me. I'm more like the translator, or like the operator, where I'm kind of like, they're talking to me, I'm taking the words that they're sharing, and then I'm sharing it with the person who's got the information. Whereas then there are the people who are what would, who are pure channels, where it's like that person just kind of goes and lets their body to be the host for spirit, and is basically like the mouthpiece for somebody else. Um, but again, psychics and mediums generally can distinguish what's mine, what's not mine. A lot of times, one of the biggest challenges that comes up for empaths is that we, especially before we learn how to work with it and learn how to develop our filters and shields, we often will not be able to tell if we're feeling our own feelings or if we're picking up on the stuff other people are feeling.
I was recently told that I was empathic, but I personally see myself as being more empathetic in the fact that I'm very sensitive to the way people feel in the way that I don't feel it. I just, like you said, understand it. I have, like they say, the bleeding heart on my sleeve, there for everyone.
Mhm, mhm.
But I have had where I'm also intuitive. I have had dreams that come true, and I've had situations where I get a sense about a person. Like if there's a person that ends up disrupting things, I do get a negative vibe from them. So I don't know if that would be more my intuition or more of an empathy thing, picking it up.
Well, so actually, intuition is another thing because I personally think there is a bit of a distinction between psychic and intuitive. And for me, intuition is more of that felt sense, it's more of that felt knowing. Where what I would say is that for me, that being empathic often means that you feel it. It's not just that you know it, but you feel it. So I would say that as you said, you have more of an empathetic quality where you have empathy. You can imagine what somebody's going through, but you're not immersed in it. It's not like you're near somebody who's going through a hard time and you're experiencing it as if you're going through the hard time. But also, tomatoes, tomatoes, it's like language is so imprecise. And all of these things, I think, tend to kind of run together in some ways. Like, where does being an empath let off and being intuitive start? Where does being a psychic, where are those lines? But personally, I find that, the empathic side in some ways is kind of the most irrational, the most emotional, the most like physical, like it's immersive. You experience it. Intuition is more of a felt knowing. And I find that for me, intuition is rarely as distressing as getting an empathic download is. Because if there's an event that's coming, or like when the COVID surges were running last year and we were like on the verge of like another surge coming through, there would be these times where I was waking up at like 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, feeling like I was plugged into an electric socket because there was so much fear on the planet and I was getting these surges of fear coming through. Whereas intuitively, like I've been getting this intuition about, like, yeah, the Delta variant is gonna be an interesting thing. Like, we're gonna be affected by this. But that's more of this intuition where it's like, I just kind of know it, but I'm not in a state of panic about it. And for me, the intuition tends to sort of live in my hara, like kind of live at that solar plexus. Empathy lives in my whole body, or being empathic lives in my whole body, but psychic stuff tends to be up in my head. And that, in my experience, is the most sort of intellectual of all of them and the one that I have the most separation from. So, does that answer your question? Does
Oh, definitely. Yes. Thank you.
Been a very fascinating conversation. I mean, we're basically third generation gifted, I would say. My
mm,
mother has seen ghosts. She's actually interacted with ghosts. She lives pretty much in a haunted house. So, with everything going on, in the world today, and trying to distinguish interacting with what is going on in mentally, what is real, what is not real, and being, I would say, I'm closer to being as psychic as my mother is.
mm.
Yes.
And so, with everything going on in the world today, yes, I do wake up sometimes with somebody else's fear in my mind. I have to rationally say, am I scared because the world's going to collapse? I don't know. Turn on the news and they say the Delta variant's exceeding. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from when it comes to stuff like that. So,
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. during the height of the lockdown, I had to be really mindful of what I was consuming, and I had to stay away from any violent television programs. I was really careful about how much news I watched. I spent most of I spent probably from I don't know, June through September watching
Okay.
Good Witch. Like I just
Yes.
because it's so sweet and it just
Right.
felt so safe. And because I just couldn't handle any more stuff. And with that waking up in the middle of the night, thankfully I've got a really good connection to my guides and spirit and our blessed mother. And so I'd be just like, am I okay, am I dying? And she'd be like, no, you're fine. She's like, you're just feeling the surges. And I'm like, thank you.
Well, I spent the lockdown taking care of my stepmother-in-law, who was slowly declining into madness because she was
Mm.
so depressed, she was so angry, and so I'm feeding off of her vibes, and I had to turn on game shows or the old westerns from the 50s and 60s, just to get her into a better mood because she was just angry, she was depressed, she was slowly losing her sense of reality.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Yes, she died in January of this year. So
Oh, oh, and was she struggling with was it dementia that she was dealing with?
no, she basically what was trying to give up on life, but she was obstinate and she didn't want to give up. But then again, she was in so much pain. And
Oh, oh, I am so sorry. That just being the caretaker and especially being super psychic and sensitive, and it's interesting because I don't know whether you have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, but interestingly, I learned, diabetes is an autoimmune disease, and there seems to be a really strong correlation between those of us who are highly sensitive and picking up on autoimmune and having autoimmune
Mhm.
diseases. It's like the thing is, we're sensitive in so many different ways, and it's sort of
right.
like if you're sensitive in one way, chances are you're sensitive in a lot of other ways too. And being the caretaker for somebody who is just going through a brutal dying process, it, my heart goes out to you. I'm so sorry. That just sounds so hard.
Oh yeah, I'd wake up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with her mentally screaming at the top of her lungs. I'd rush in there into
Mm,
the bedroom and she's
mm-hmm.
sound asleep. And
Mm,
so,
mm. Yeah, that does not sound like fun.
no, basically, the whole family feels a very special touch in their heart because I was able to keep my cool and keep quiet. And I got myself addicted for about 21 days onto energy drinks just to try to lock that stuff out.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I went through a very brief period when Red Bull first came out where I really got into Red Bull. And the first week or two that I was drinking it, I was on top of the world. And then but after about 2 weeks I started experiencing excruciating pain. And what I realized is that the taurine was affecting my body in this bizarre way. And so I could not drink the Red Bull without just experiencing this just agonizing joint pain. So I was kind of like, yeah, let's stop doing that.
Right,
But yeah, so been there, done that. Definitely have had a moment with the energy drinks before.
right.
Yeah.
One of the conversations that Richard and I have had quite a bit is the fact that with his sensitivity to his abilities, and he feels the best thing to do is just totally shut it off and ignore that it exists. And to me, it seems like this is the wrong way to go about it, because when you try to ignore it, that's when it tries to get your attention more. Um,
Yeah. I I love this topic or this question. I mean, I've met so many people who are highly sensitive, intuitive, empathic, who want to shut it down. They're like, how do I control it? How do I get it to stop? And I think almost all of us who have tried to put up a wall or shut that down The problem is that it's kind of like putting gasoline into a pressure cooker. You can put the pressure on for a while, but eventually that information is going to find a way to get out. And it will find ways to get out through our physical body. It can show up in the form of health issues. It can show up in the form of really weird, unexplainable emotional distress, but it's going to come through. And I am a very strong believer that it is not about stopping it, it's about learning how to work with it and learning how, and also, I don't know about, Richard, about your experience, but I think one of the things that can happen is that when we receive information, there can be that part of us that feels like it's our job to be the savior for the world and that it's our job to do something about it. And being able to acknowledge pain and acknowledge suffering and acknowledge crisis without feeling that it's our job to be the second coming, like that we don't have to become the Messiah for this, but that we can acknowledge it and we can have compassion for it, but we can let it go, that we can detach from it. And I think that one of the things that makes it so hard when we are absorbing or taking in information and receiving things is when we see stuff that's really difficult, not feeling the burden of responsibility for it. And so I know for myself that the more comfortable I have gotten with sitting with discomfort and sitting with pain, sitting with my own pain, has made it much, much easier for me to acknowledge and sit with other people's pain.
Yes, but you also ask yourself, am I feeling their pain or am I feeling my own pain a lot of times?
Exactly. And that's actually, in my book, Empathic Mastery, it's a 5-step system for working through this stuff. And, where there's so many systems and things that sort of start with the just bubble up with light, send love and light to it. I believe the problem is that as highly sensitive, empathic, intuitive, people, a lot of times we've already absorbed so much energy that we're kind of like a bathtub filled with dirty bath water. And we've got to drain that bathtub before we're going to be able to put up any kind of really effective protective filters and shields. So, what I find is that the first step is not about protection. The first step is recognize. We need to recognize first, we need to just recognize that we're in a state of distress, like just even acknowledging it, because we live in a culture that is constantly saying, suck it up, buttercup, keep going, just ignore it, it will go away. And the thing is that it doesn't just go away. But so the first step is just recognizing we're feeling something, we're picking up on something. The second part of recognize is recognizing what's mine, what's not mine, and starting to be able to distinguish, like, oh, this is not even my pain. I'm picking up on my mother in law's pain. And then, second of the 5 steps is release, which has to do with letting go of the stuff that we've taken on that isn't ours, or letting go of all of the emotional congestion, trauma from the past, releasing the stuff that is keeping us triggered, that's keeping us anxious, that gets our wheels spinning, gets us, basically gets us kind of like back in trying to take control and drive the bus down to, like crazy town. And then the third step is when we get to start doing protecting ourselves by building up our filters and shields, as well as creating boundaries in our life, establishing policies and strategies so that we're not just constantly being a doormat and like feeling responsible for everybody and doing all the things. And then the fourth step is connect, because I believe the universe abhors a vacuum, and that if we don't want to be picking up all the negativity and thoughts and feelings from the world around us, we really need to connect to something better. And so I believe it's like connecting to a power greater than ourselves. And then the fifth step is act, which really goes back to how do we live in a completely new and different way so that we can use our gifts to make a difference in the world, as opposed to just being completely overwhelmed by our sensitivity.
I kind of go into the fact of ADT, which is ask, what this is about, debate, and then replace. whether
Mm,
whether it's, do I really need this? No. Well, then I'll replace this with something else. My philosophy right now is
yes. Yes, yes. And just those taking those moments of inquiry, is this really true? Is this really accurate? I mean, and that kind of goes back to like what it means to be a hot mess world-class awfulizer, is that we just go down that rabbit hole immediately. We feel out of sorts and it's just and it's kind of like stop the world, I'm having a feeling.
right.
And where we don't have any skepticism, we don't have any inquiry, we don't take any time to just kind of question the veracity of what's going on.
Well, we kind of live in a society where everybody's pulling out the doom and gloom most of the time, and we really, as humans, are not really trained for doom and gloom. We actually are always been problem solvers.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think, the other thing about human beings is we don't do transitions well. We don't adapt to change super easily. And a lot of times, I think humans, the thing that is hardest for human beings is uncertainty. We'd rather project a bad scenario than sit in the possibility of not knowing. And being able to sit with not knowing, I think, is like, I mean, for one thing, I actually believe that it is a very big piece of kind of like the global lesson that we as a species are learning right now, is like allowing for uncertainty and allowing for mystery, and also getting out of the driver's seat in the sense of our ego trying to control all of it, and really accessing and tapping into a wisdom that is so much bigger than us, but also accepting that there's a lot of stuff our puny little human brains do not have the answers. We're not the ones who are supposed to sort this all out.
Well, I kind of feel like we should be able the ones to sort out, but then of course we could ask questions of the universe. In all honesty, have them help us.
We can absolutely ask questions of the universe. Yes, yes. And the way I look at it is like it's my job to keep my side of the street clean. Like, and there's that, there's the Serenity Prayer, it's like, Great Spirit, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I know that my job is to not eat sugar. I also know that I have absolutely no control over whether somebody else eats sugar or whether somebody, like what other stupid, crazy behaviors some other person engages in. I can say, hey, this is my experience, but I can't control that. And the wisdom to know the difference lies in that recognition of what is my side of the street, what is my job, what is my responsibility, and what is above my pay grade.
Right. You could always walk away from the choices that somebody else's makes. It is kind of hard to do that, but at the same time,
It is. I believe that one of the reasons why it is so hard is because as highly sensitive people, intuitive, empathic people, we feel better when other people feel better. When somebody's feeling lousy, we often will feel lousy too. And so, a lot of times, we will get into trying to rescue and we'll feel this incredible sense of urgency about making things better as opposed to just detaching and kind of being like, hey, knock yourself out, boo. How's that working for you? Because the thing is that if we don't have effective filters and shields, we take a hit when they take a hit. So it's completely understandable that we're going to want to make it better and we're going to want to step in and try to find a solution because we're feeling it ourselves. And so I think that's one of the reasons why, like learning how to let go and detach, we first have to have released a lot of the pain that we've been carrying around before we can just let it go.
I really appreciate this conversation, Miss Moore. It's a very interesting topic we're discussing.
Oh, this has been such a pleasure, Richard. it's just such a delight. And I mean, I just want to say or acknowledge, like, I love the fact that this podcast is called The Skeptical Psychic, because I actually really think that skepticism is a really really important thing for us to have within our awareness of picking up on
Right.
extra sensory perception. And that, just because we have these abilities doesn't always make it true. And I think that having a certain amount of skepticism and, healthy scrutiny is a really important thing.
That was a decision of both my sister and I, because I may be a special person with psychic powers, but at the same time, I'm gonna find out the BS in the problem before I believe.
Hmm.
I'll question everything.
Well, and what is it? Is it Occam's the that whole kind of like the whole thing of like, if there's a
Occam's razor.
Occam's razor. It's sort of like, I always go for the practical thing first. Like, I'm much more likely to like be questioning or looking at what physiological things, what physical things, what circumstantial things, what pragmatic things
Mm-hmm.
could be affecting somebody before I'm going to say, "Oh, you've got an infestation of ghosts in your house." Like, I think that that's the
Right.
thing, is that I always will start at the most obvious answer, and I'll keep narrowing it down, or sort of knocking out like knocking out all of the kind of ticking off the boxes and going, not that, not that, not that, and going to the more and more complicated things. The other thing I will say is that in my experience as an EFT practitioner and a healer who's worked with a lot of people, so frequently the thing is that it's not just one thing. So often there's multiple factors that are contributing to why we're in the state we're in. And in order for things to be turned around, we need to deal with things on a strategic level. We need to deal with things on an emotional level. We need to deal with our past and the triggers that it's causing us, as well as sometimes the ancestral stuff that we've inherited and we are carrying in our DNA. Because now they are finally finding that we literally inherit fear and other trauma and distress passed down in our DNA. So we're born carrying trauma from other people's lives. And then, of course, if you believe in reincarnation and past lives, there is also all of the stuff that happened in previous incarnations, and then there's environmental factors and, Wi-Fi and EMFs and mold and toxins and chemicals and yada, yada, yada. And what I find again and again is that it's always, or almost always, more than one thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember it. I can't really quote this properly, but noted author and spiritualist Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once stated that when you separate facts and opinions, whatever's left is the truth.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's so fascinating with EFT. A very big piece of EFT is questioning how accurate, or like questioning, where is this coming from? Like, what is this belief and how true is this belief? And it's so fascinating how frequently our beliefs inform our perception of reality. And that when we start really opening, like giving air to the belief systems, we can start realizing, like, wow, I've spent my entire life stuck in this place because I had this false perception about this thing that really has absolutely no basis in reality, but it's informed my sense of self for the last like 20 years. And it's really fascinating how much emotion and perception can completely, we can imagine that it's truth and fact, when in fact it's perception.
Everything you're saying is so true. I know, like I was saying about some of the things that I have had trouble getting through, is it's all false perceptions that have been so ingrained in me that even though logically I know it's false, there's still that emotional entanglement to it that I just can't let that feeling go. Even though mentally I'm like, okay, this is a false context, but then you feel it to where it's like, but it feels so true.
Right, right. Well, and I think that what happens for a lot of us is that when we experience a heightened emotion, we are going through an experience and we are experiencing a heightened emotion, we will then often mix the experience with the emotion and kind of lock in this idea that because of this, then this. And the thing is that it doesn't just exist in our mind, it's also kind of locked into our body. And I think that what I have noticed is that it's almost like we have to take out the way that, like, I'm just trying to think of an example. Um, Oh God, I'll use an example of something that I was going through recently where I was working on some like this feeling about, feeling like old feelings of being kind of like a fraud and like you're just gonna screw it up. And I suddenly was back at this memory of being like a teenager in high school at the 0 hour. I had a paper due and I was like cramming in the library, an hour before class. And I was so stressed out. Like I was really anxious about getting this paper done. I basically, told myself, gave myself a message that I was a screw up. And I had this message in my mind that I was a screw up and that I was, and I was a procrastinator and that like just all these conclusions about my identity got formed. But because I was in such a state of stress at the same time that this happened, I locked in this memory. Not only did I lock in the memory, but I locked in the belief system about myself that was tied into this one singular isolated event. And as I worked on it, what I realized was nobody ever taught me about time management. Nobody ever taught me about how to reverse engineer a paper. Nobody ever gave me any of the tools that I needed in order to be prepared for something. They just were basically like, "Are you doing your homework?" And what I realized was I was completely unprepared for handling it in any better way than I did because I didn't have any tools. And yet I had been living with this self perception because of the stress of that situation that was completely false. Does does that make sense how that ties in?
Yes, that makes total sense. Yes. I'm ADHD. However, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 40, about 5 years ago. So I completely understand what you're saying about feeling like the procrastinator, the screw up, and all of that, because that's been my whole life. And like I said, now that I know, okay, I have ADHD and it's not necessarily my fault because I do have my brain
Mhm.
works differently than other people's, not using it as an excuse, but I still have that feeling, like you said, about being a failure, being a screw up, being an imposter, um, just wanting to go out there and live my dreams, but being so afraid of looking like a fool because of being the imposter and all of that.
Absolutely. And so here's something I just recently heard about. I was reading about that there's this really interesting thing that happens for those of us who are sort of not neurotypical, but especially if we are in that kind of ADHD world. There's this thing called rejection dysphoria.
Yes.
Yes. And it's like, so we anticipate and we are just like living in this, like, oh my God, they're going to
Mhm.
hate me. They hate me. They hate me. They hate me. So here's some tidbits. There's a gene mutation, the MTHFR gene mutation, that tends to that affects our body's ability to process B12 vitamins and folic acid, and it affects our liver and our body's ability to detox and methylate. And what's fascinating about this gene mutation is that there seems to be a very strong correlation between people with autoimmune diseases, people who are not neurotypical. So basically, people who are anywhere on the spectrum from like the extreme autism spectrum to dyslexia, ADHD, learning disabilities, and also autoimmune diseases, non neurotypical, mental health issues, and then also just being like highly sensitive. And then another one is not just autoimmune but also more prone to cancer, more prone to vulnerabilities. And so I think the thing is that as we're having this conversation, I think that there's a link between being highly sensitive and also having, quote, ADHD. Because part of it is about how do we process information. There's the sensory processing issues. I think a lot of empaths could be diagnosed as having a, quote, sensory processing disorder, because it's all about the fact that we are getting too much information all the time. And if we don't have any coping skills or tools for processing it, and nobody's teaching us how, then of course we're going to melt down. Of course we're going to have a hard time.
It's so interesting you say that because this is something I've been thinking this for quite a while now, so it's so amazing that you say that because being with my ADHD and other people that I know who are highly sensitive, who have, they're either on the spectrum or something like that. So I have also been thinking, is there a connection between these two?
I mean, if you look up and you start doing any research on MTHFR gene mutations, you will find some really fascinating correlations with a lot of these different things. I personally, I couldn't, I started trying to do a survey, but it didn't really fly. I might, now that I've got a much bigger newsletter, I think I might actually send this out again. But a lot of people don't know about the gene mutation. But what I also believe that there is a correlation between highly sensitive and empathic and this gene mutation. And I know from my personal experience with clients who've done blood work and my own experience that many of us do actually have this gene mutation. Going back to something about ADHD that I just wanted to talk about that kind of goes into the never being taught how to manage or the back thing, backtrack stuff. For those of us who are not in that neurotypical world, having somebody say to you, hurry up, get dressed, we're going out. That's just going to have us be like deer in the
Mhm,
headlights because we can't parse those things out. And I think that, just from the standpoint of for a child, like if you've got a kid who's spectrumy in any way, you say get dressed, we're going out, they're just going to look at you. You have to say things like go up to your room, grab your socks, get your shoes, put your socks and shoes on, put on your pants, put on your t-shirt. Okay, go brush your teeth. Now brush your hair. Okay, now come with me, we're going outside, we're going to the car. That it's like things have to be broken down into micro
mhm,
steps, and we need to understand the actual, like the goal, not just this abstract idea of, oh, this is the thing. And I think that that's what's unfortunate is that we live in a culture that tends to think about a very abstract end result and somehow thinks that we are going to know how to get from point A to point B with absolutely no information between A and B,
mhm.
or more accurately, between point A and point N.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like with my husband with his stroke, I'm having to break steps down like that. So I totally get what you're saying. I have to tell him, okay, we're going to make dinner. Let's get the pot out. Let's do this. And it's like you said, breaking it down step by step. Because if I just tell him, okay, we're going to make dinner, it's like you said, the deer in the headlights.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? And I know as I've gotten more sort of compassion for that with myself, I've come to really recognize it's like I need to keep it really simple.
Hmm.
I need to keep it really simple. And, for years, Spirit and I have had this conversation where I will ask, okay, so what next? And if they've given me an assignment, if they've given me like a job, they've said, you need to do this next thing, and I ask for any more information, they will, for the last like 35, 40 years, they've basically come back and said to me, do what is before you and the rest will be
Hmm.
revealed. And like, they're just constantly being like, look, child, you cannot handle more than one thing on your list. You need to do one thing at a time, and that's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like trying to see the forest with the
Yeah.
past the trees.
Yeah. It's just and just I think it was Mike Dooley who talks about the idea of the cursed hows. And I think that's the other thing, that as human beings, we get so sucked into trying to figure out how we're going to get somewhere. All we need to be thinking about is what does it, not even what is it supposed to look like or what are the details, but how do we want to feel? What is the quality we want to draw to us as we go forward, and kind of keeping that really strong sense of like of like, yeah, like I know I have a concrete goal, which is my concrete goal is to get the audiobook recorded so that it can go out for the
Mhm.
holiday season. Like that's a very concrete goal. But I'm not necessarily going to I'm not going to like paint in with finer strokes like what else needs to go into that, because it's like I don't need to get into the hows.
Mhm.
I just need to keep on taking each next step and praying for guidance and asking. I mean, I've been just like, lead me to the people that can help me,
Mhm.
lead me to the resources that will give me, that will guide me and show me what I need to see.
Yes, I that's one of the problems that I have, like you were saying about the being uncertain and the fear of uncertainty. I'm the type of person I want to know the how. It's like, how am I going to do this? And then I start freaking out because I'm not getting the answers and I'm so uncertain about what's going to happen. And so that's a big one for me.
It's huge. It's huge. And we live in a society that is so into the how. So into the how, so into the this is how we're going to do this. And it's funny, one of the things that I've been realizing like a little while ago, I was listening to some Abraham Esther Hicks, and Abraham, and just like this idea of like us as human beings like creating our own reality and everything. And, kind of like I've always personally struggled mightily with the idea of you create your own reality when there are so many people who are really suffering on this planet. And where between you and me, it has always seemed incredibly convenient that almost everybody who says this is white and has money. Like, I don't know if it's been lost on you, but, it's just sort of like, isn't it interesting that you've been born into this incredibly, or somebody's been born into an incredibly like very privileged environment. It's really easy to say you create your own reality when it's a nice
Mhm.
reality. Whereas if somebody's living it, is going through hell, I think it's a lot harder to say I'm creating this. And I've always struggled with that idea. But what I realized is that the human ego is so invested, the mind and the ego is so invested into its identity that when we hear you create your own reality, our ego is hearing that it's the ego that's creating it. But what I realized is you create your own reality is talking about the collective consciousness. It's talking about the whole, not just me, puny little old me, or puny, little old you. We're talking about you as in the entire I am consciousness creating this reality that is so much bigger than one individual ego. And so, when people start doing like dream boards and just all of these things of I'm going to manifest this, when we're doing it from the ego, it just feels to me like we're trying to run around on a battery pack. And but also it's sort of like we have absolutely no understanding of the magnitude and the vastness of what is actually of what we're really talking about.
Exactly.
That's interesting because there's a lot of times where I've tried like dream boarding or I've tried affirmation, and to me, it almost comes off as feeling false.
Mhm.
So I end up
Mhm.
kind of just stop doing it because it doesn't feel real.
Yeah, I wrote an article a little while ago, and in my book, I talk about this, but like affirmations are a great detector because the thing is, you cannot use an affirmation that you don't have purchase with. Like, if you don't believe it and you say it, it's just going to cause dissonance. And like, if you do something where you say, I'm a million trillion billion dollar, million trillionaire, like, if you say that and you're not, like, you've got like, -$50 in your bank account and you say, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, it's not going to sink in because it's a lie. It's not
Hmm.
true. What we will do though is that we will hear an affirmation and immediately the part of us that will say that is just not accurate. That is not true. And we want to listen for the pushback. It's not true because of this. And the key is then we start dismantling the triggers, we start dismantling the memories, we start dismantling the places where we got stuck. And then we can start dialing in and finding, well, what are we open to? Like the difference between saying something like, I live in a world of incredible abundance, all my needs are met, If your needs aren't getting met and you're like feeling like, how am I going to get through this? You're going to have a really different experience. But you can say something like, um, I am ready and open to receiving the abundance of the universe. Like, try those two things out. Like, I live in a world of limitless abundance, and all my needs are met. Try saying that versus, I am ready and willing to receive the abundance of the universe. So we want to say things that we have buy in about, that we believe in, that we agree with. And that can make a huge, huge difference.
I firmly believe that I could find the best parking space right in front of the grocery store every time.
Hmm.
That's my affirmation.
Well, and that is,
And I do.
yeah, and there are certain things where we've gotten good at manifesting, and we actually like we got this. We've worked this out. And there's things where it's like, we've got it sorted. I think that a lot of times when it comes to, the universe, it's sort of like manifesting a parking space is an ask that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of like, we don't necessarily have to have a lot of suspension of disbelief. Being a New York Times bestseller author, that, on the other hand, is one where we're going to come up against a lot more pushback.
Mhm.
Yeah, I used to have a whole ritual of praying for parking, and just like thanking the universe, and I would always find parking spaces. And, so I do think there absolutely are things that we can just like be like, I'm completely confident that I can manifest this. Whereas then there's other things where I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. I'm not sure I got it.
Right. What I found also helps me out is gratitude,
Yes.
especially with everything with my ADHD. I have anxiety, and I've gotten to where I start to think, okay, well, oh my goodness, I don't have enough money in my bank account. But then I think, but my bills are paid.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helps me to get through it, is that gratitude of, thankfully, my bills are paid. There's food in my fridge. I have a roof over my head. And so to me, that seems to help me out a lot. Instead of doing the affirmations, to say with the gratitude of being thankful for what I have now, to prepare myself for what I can have in the future, if that makes sense.
Well, and the thing about gratitude is that gratitude puts us in this state of flow and ease, and it allows us to be in the quality and the state we want to be in. The other problem with affirmations when we're using aspirational affirmations is, by their very nature, they are suggesting lack, because we are talking about something in the future, not about where we're at now. When we move into the field of and the presence and the state of gratitude, and we sink into that grace of gratitude, then we are in the resonant field of what we want, and then we attract more of it. So, a lot of times when we're making vision boards and we're saying affirmations that are not reflecting our experience currently, we are focusing on what the dissonance between our current reality and our future hopes. Whereas gratitude brings us into that vibration. And there is nothing more effective than being in that vibrational state of grace to manifest more grace. The other thing I have found, and I've worked with tarot, many, many years, one of the lessons that the Queen of Pentacles card taught me was that a lot of times wealth and abundance comes in the form of our needs getting met, not necessarily a specific number on the bank account. And that a lot of times people, when they get caught up in the cursed house, it's like, oh, I want to manifest a beach house. But then instead of thinking about, they just want to manifest a house on the beach, they start thinking, I need to manifest $1 million, or I need to do this, 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 and this. And the thing is, we block our channel because we get into the how of it as opposed to the quality of it and the feeling of it and the what we want to attract. And I have absolutely found that it's like the abundance of the Queen of Pentacles in particular is, don't get caught up in the middleman of money. Look at the wealth that is here. Like, If you've got a roof over your head, if you're getting plenty of sleep, if you've got an abundant garden full of vegetables, if you have friends surrounding you, if you are healthy, like all the things that are working, it's like, okay, yeah, so you got 20 bucks in your bank account. Maybe you've got a hanging debt with your credit card. But if all things are well, it's like that is a temporary state, and it is not a sign of, that things are broken.
That makes so much sense. Like, I'm looking to get a home in the next year, and I'm looking at, okay, I need to make this much more money to get the home. Okay, how am I going to make that money to get that home? And so I'm focusing on all of that instead of taking a step back and, like you said, feeling that feeling of what is it going to feel like to be in that home. And
Yes. Well, and I had an experience many, many years ago. I mean, like we're talking 25 plus years ago. I was at a psychic fair and I was working as a psychic. And the Four of Wands came up in the reading, and I was like, "You're going to buy a house." And the woman was like, "How the hell am I going to buy a house?" She was like, I have no idea how that's going to even happen." I said, "No, you're going to buy a house." And I said, "Your job is to start looking." And interestingly, this was an event that I attended the next year. And this woman came back to me and she's like, "You were spot on. You were completely right. I bought a house." She's like, "I had no idea how it was going to happen. When you told me that, I thought you were completely full of it. But I did." And that's the thing. So my suggestion to you is, if you know it's time to draw a house to you and manifest one, start looking. Like, start looking for the house, because it's sort of like the universe will find a way. If this is your house and it's meant to be yours, the universe will find a way for things to fall into place and financing to happen. And just, who knows? Maybe it's going to be you find the perfect house and it's going to be like a rent to own situation, where the owners, it's going to be owner financed, and they're like, "Yeah, let's rent to own, let's create a contract." But like, where there's these opportunities. And I think so often as human beings, our ego gets caught up in these ideas of like, this is the way it has to happen, instead of just do what is before you and the rest will be revealed.
yes, well, I definitely feel like this recording has just been destined to happen. So many things that I have felt and so many questions that I've had. I just feel so much at ease after talking with you.
I'm so glad. This has been an awesome conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed your viewpoints and specifics on, the manifestation, on emphatic versus empath,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the health and safety and all the wonderful dietary tips of the trade.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Miss Moore. We really appreciate that.
Oh, it has been, you guys, Kimbra and Richard, it has been such an incredible pleasure chatting with you guys. It really, what a divine appointment. I have no doubt that your angels and my angels, were like, "Hey," and probably our dead people too. Because, yeah, like, we're just like, "You guys need to talk." Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Well, where can our listeners find you if they're interested in learning more about you?
Absolutely. So the easiest way to find me is to just jump on over to empathicmastery.com.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and we really appreciate it.
Oh, Kimbra, it has been such a pleasure, Richard, and just really, what a delight to chat with both of you. Just so fun, and just such a great conversation. I'm so glad you guys found me. Really,
Well, we're glad that we found you.
really satisfying conversation, and congratulations on the launch of your podcast. So exciting.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got some scallops that need to be
Oh,
cooked.
Oh,
no.
So,
goodness.
yeah, my husband
Yes.
just picked up the groceries and is like, he's like, "You're gonna cook these tonight." I'm
Yes.
like, "Yes, I'm gonna cook them tonight." Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Yes. Mine's walked in here a couple of times, like, are you done yet?
yeah, yeah.
Well, like I said, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I hope we continue to communicate. And this is the beginning of a great
Yes.
friendship.
I hope so too. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Absolutely. I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful evening. And yeah, and I'm just sending so much love to you and your podcast. May it bring you, may just untold, unexpected miracles unfold from this.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're so welcome.
Just doing it for the joy and pleasure of it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Living out a dream we've had for many years. We've wanted to start this. So,
It's such a blast. I mean, I just absolutely love the spoken word, and I just absolutely love podcasts. I love recording. I love interviewing people. I love being interviewed, and I love all aspects of it. It is just so much fun, and there's so many good podcasts out there now.
yes, there are.
Anyway, as we drift off into the night, remember, everybody, that we love you and unpleasant nightmares.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.